Marilyn Monroe once made a joke. I don't know if it was a joke actually. She said, "I read poems. I read poetry to save time," and I think that's a fantastic and mysterious and wonderful thing to say because I actually agree. That's what I like about poetry. It saves time. You get an incredibly large amount of experience, knowledge, information, mythology, religion, philosophy, everything in a very small space and time. Um, Poetry is compressed ideas and feelings in the most charged and musical language possible. And because I feel that way, in the beginning I liked to read poems that were basically skeletons on the page, very minimalist, small, and I could read a lot of them and learn a great deal. I didn't, I mean, I read novels, I liked prose enough, but one thing I really didn't like about them, especially in my late teens and early 20s, was the length. A Russian novel would take me quite a long time to read, or even a novel like Henry James' Portrait of a Lady. Whereas if you read a poem's Portrait of a Lady by T.S. Eliot or Ezra Pound, it's a lot shorter. And I think there was a point to be made, specifically in the 21st century, about making poetry a way of getting experience quickly. So that's all a way of saying that when I first started reading Robert Browning, a poet that the poets I loved considered a giant, I found it a struggle. Um, I found the lines dense and the text lengthy. I found it annoying that it was that long. Why didn't he edit? He could have made this a lot shorter. He could have made his lines more dynamic. He could have made, if you imagine a poet like E. Cummings, he could have exploded the page, made it more a visual experience. This is just one big stanza block, and I found it a struggle to read it and to care about what was going on. But struggling to read and struggling to get out of your comfort zone, these are different and pleasurable parts of reading too. And I think Robert Browning has taught me a great deal about the bridge between drama and poetry. And this poem in particular has really paid off in my reading it multiple times over the past, let's say, 10 years. This is a dramatic monologue. In this, a character is in period dress and walks onto stage, and he is talking to a character in particular, but he's also talking to the audience. And the reader is placed in the position of the person being spoken to. The way I like to imagine it is a man talking to a camera, as if it's another character. And I think Browning learned a lot from Shakespeare, from how to construct an entire persona in one speech. Shakespeare had sonnets where the poet is addressing an imaginary person or the reader themselves, but it's in his drama, his greatest achievement was to create characters. Well, Browning wasn't going to sustain a character for an entire play, but these these speeches, these dramatic monologues he created, really do create fully realized characters. And what you need to think about when you're looking at this, and specifically when you're reading it out loud, or eventually if you get to the point where you can perform it, is to think about the speaker. Who is actually speaking? What do they know about themselves? But also what do they realize? What do they reveal, sorry, to us without even realizing it? Um, Another thing that I've been interested in is think of the constructed audience, the person being addressed, and in some ways that turns out to be us. Uh, is this a character in the poem as well? Is the responses that we're supposed to be having, are they part of the poem too? When you come across dramatic monologues, you need to think about theater and performance of the character, as you do with almost all of these character and voice poems. But you also, of course, it's a poem, so people don't actually speak like they do in this poem, My Last Duchess, usually. So let's try to see how the language is charged, what this character speaks like, what he reveals about himself, and what he conceals. And that struggle to understand that is the real pleasure of this poem. Poem, the Duke of Ferrara is showing around a messenger, an envoy from a family, and the daughter of this family is someone he wants to marry. And as he's showing around this envoy, he comes across, he draws a curtain, and he shows this messenger a painting. And he's very proud of this painting, and he's proud particularly of the painter, but also how lifelike it looks. And he explains, actually, this was his former wife, the previous Duchess, the last Duchess. And he goes into the details of the painting, how wonderful, how lifelike it is, how particularly how much it catches the girls blushing. And this blushing starts getting him on diversions, noting that, his wife, this blushing that you see in this painting, the painter himself talked about how often it was that she blushed, and it wasn't just, the Duke notes, her husband, him, who caused this blushing, but she was a woman who was too soon made glad, he says. She was just made happy by all sorts of things, and further, she was equivocal in what pleased her. So she was as equally pleased by, let's say, a bowl of cherries brought in by some fool and the 900-year-old legacy of his prestigious name. And he's displeased with her, and he has no actual proof, but there's some suggestion that he felt that she might be disloyal or unloyal. And the way he saw this was her smile, her laughter, her joy at all these things. And he contemplates maybe showing her or teaching her how to discern the quality of gifts and determine what's good and what's bad. But actually, he really thinks about it, and he couldn't be bothered to stoop to such a role as a teacher. And he explains that he gave commands, and the smiling stopped. But there she is in this painting, and it looks as if she's alive. It really looks as if she was alive. And then he pulls the envoy away to walk away from this painting, and he points to another statue of Neptune taming the seahorses, and how he's really proud of it. And so it's a poem about art, very particular, a painting in particular, and a statue at the end. But of course, well, not of course, there's a lot of speculation about what this poem's actually about. But it seems that this poem's also about jealousy and murder. But you know what it's actually about? It's about the character speaking. I mean, all the poems in the character and voice sequence are about character, but this one in particular is about the character that emerges from the language here. What does he actually know? What does he reveal? If you want to go further, how do you envision this guy? What does he wear? How does he speak? How does he point to the fact that he's murdered or ordered the murder of his previous wife? But how can we be sure? Is there a smoking gun in this poem? Is there a line that tells us, yes, absolutely, there's a motive, there was the means, and there was the execution? If not, if it's only suggested, well, how does Browning do that? And what does that reveal about this character? And also the ending. The ending is ambiguous. Why this discussion of the statue? What could that possibly mean? So that's the straight reading of the poem. Now I'm going to do a close reading of certain sections of it. It's a very lengthy poem, so I'm only going to look at some key sections. But I need you to consider on your own, now that you know what the poem's about, really what does the poem say to you? And what themes and what other poems have we read in this sequence connect to this poem? My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. Ferrara. That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will it please you sit and look at her? I said Fra Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I, and seemed as they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Fra Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one. My favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush, at least. She thanked men. Good! But thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-years-old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one, and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss, or there exceeded the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping. And I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whene'er I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew. I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. Will't please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence, is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innisbrook cast in bronze for me.